Marcus Chen had been standing at his post for 3 hours when the cramp hit his left leg. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the palace courtyard, and sweat trickled down his back beneath the heavy ceremonial uniform. As one of the elite palace sentinels, he was trained to remain perfectly still during official ceremonies, but the pain was becoming unbearable. The weekly magistrate inspection was in full swing. Magistrate Harrison Webb, known throughout the district for his strict adherence to protocol, walked slowly along the line of guards. His sharp eyes missed nothing. A slightly crooked badge, a speck of dust on a boot, or heaven forbid, any movement from the supposedly statue-like sentinels. Marcus tried to ignore the growing pain, but his leg began to shake involuntarily. He knew the rules. Any breach of formation during an official inspection could result in immediate dismissal or worse, public punishment. The palace had zero tolerance for what they called ceremonial misconduct. As Magistrate Webb approached his section, Marcus felt the cramp intensify. His vision blurred slightly from the pain, and without thinking, he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. It was barely noticeable, perhaps an inch of movement, but to the trained eye of Magistrate Webb, it might as well have been a dance. The magistrate stopped directly in front of Marcus. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Other sentinels remained frozen, but Marcus could feel their tension. Everyone knew what happened to guards who broke formation during inspection. Last month, Sentinel Rodriguez had been fined 3 months' salary for scratching his nose during a similar ceremony. Name and rank. Magistrate Webb's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Marcus Chen, Senior Sentinel, 3rd Division. Sir, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the churning in his stomach. Did you just move, Sentinel Chen? Marcus considered lying. A quick, no sir, might end this nightmare, but something in his upbringing, instilled by his late father who had been a court clerk for 30 years, prevented him from dishonesty in the face of authority. Yes, sir. I shifted my weight due to a muscle cramp. A murmur rippled through the crowd of visiting dignitaries and palace staff who had gathered to watch the inspection. Breaking formation was bad enough, but admitting to it was almost unheard of. Most guards would have denied it and hoped for the best. Magistrate Webb's eyebrows rose slightly. In his 15 years of conducting these inspections, no sentinel had ever admitted to a breach so readily. Most tried to argue, make excuses, or simply deny what he had clearly observed. You admit to breaking ceremonial protocol during an official state inspection? Yes, sir. I take full responsibility for my actions. The magistrate walked slowly around Marcus, examining him like a specimen under a microscope. The other sentinels remained frozen, but Marcus could sense their sympathy and fear. They all knew this could happen to any of them on any given day. Sentinel Chen, you are hereby charged with breach of ceremonial conduct, failure to maintain formation, and disruption of official proceedings. You will report to the disciplinary chamber at 1400 hours for sentencing. Marcus felt his heart sink. The disciplinary chamber was where careers ended. Guards who entered for major infractions rarely emerged with their positions intact. Some were fined enormous sums, others were reassigned to menial posts in remote locations, and the unlucky ones faced public punishment that would shame their families for generations. Yes, sir, I understand. As the inspection continued, Marcus remained at his post, but his mind raced. He thought about his younger sister who depended on his salary for her university education. He considered his mother, who was proud to tell her neighbors that her son served at the royal palace. Most of all, he worried about his own future. When the ceremony finally ended and the sentinels were dismissed, Marcus walked slowly toward the palace quarters. His fellow guards avoided eye contact. Association with someone facing disciplinary action could reflect poorly on their own records. Only his longtime friend and roommate, David Park, approached him. Marcus, I'm sorry. Everyone saw what happened. It could have been any of us. Thanks, David. I just hope the magistrate shows some mercy. But Marcus knew that Magistrate Webb was not known for mercy. The man had built his reputation on strict enforcement of rules and regulations. His disciplinary decisions were always harsh but fair, following the letter of the law without exception. That afternoon, Marcus spent his free time in the palace library, a privilege granted to all sentinels for professional development. Most guards never used this benefit, preferring to spend their off-duty hours in recreation or rest. But Marcus had always been different. Since joining the Palace Guard 5 years ago, he had spent countless hours reading law books, historical records, and administrative procedures. His interest in law had begun in childhood, listening to his father's stories about court proceedings and legal precedents. Although his family's financial situation had prevented him from pursuing formal legal education, Marcus had continued learning on his own. He could recite hundreds of legal statutes from memory and often helped his fellow guards understand the complex regulations that governed their service. As he sat in the library, preparing for his afternoon appointment with Destiny, Marcus pulled out a thick volume of administrative law. If he was going to face disciplinary action, he wanted to understand exactly what procedures would be followed and what his rights were under the current legal code. What he discovered in the dusty pages would change everything. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the library windows when Marcus found it, a subsection of the Palace Administrative Code that had been updated just 6 months ago. Most people, including many officials, were unaware of the change because it had been buried in a massive omnibus bill dealing primarily with budget allocations. The new regulation provided specific protections for palace personnel who admitted to minor infractions and took immediate responsibility for their actions. More importantly, it required disciplinary hearings to consider the full context of any breach, including the defendant's service record, the severity of the infraction, and whether the breach posed any actual threat to security or ceremonial dignity. Marcus read the section 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. Then he researched the legal precedents cited in the footnotes. By the time he closed the book, he had a clear understanding of how this new regulation could potentially change his situation, if he could present it properly. At exactly 1400 hours, Marcus stood outside the disciplinary chamber, his heart pounding but his mind clear. He had spent his entire adult life following orders and accepting whatever fate the system handed him. Today, for the first time, he was going to fight back, not with defiance or anger, but with knowledge and careful preparation. The heavy wooden door opened and a clerk beckoned him inside. The disciplinary chamber was exactly as Marcus had imagined, cold, formal, and intimidating. High vaulted ceilings stretched above mahogany panels that had witnessed countless careers destroyed by poor decisions and bad luck. A single chair sat in the center of the room, facing a raised platform where 3 officials would determine his fate. Magistrate Webb entered first, his black robes rustling as he took his seat at the center of the panel. To his left sat Colonel Morrison, the head of palace security, a stern woman whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for incompetence. On the right was Administrator Fleming, a thin man responsible for personnel matters and disciplinary procedures. Sentinel Chen, you stand accused of ceremonial misconduct during an official inspection. How do you plead to these charges? Magistrate Webb's voice echoed in the chamber. Marcus had rehearsed this moment in his mind dozens of times during the past few hours. Sir, I plead guilty to the factual circumstances, but request permission to address the legal context of my actions under current administrative code. The 3 officials exchanged glances. In their combined 50 years of conducting disciplinary hearings, they had never heard a sentinel request to address legal context. Most guards simply pleaded guilty, apologized profusely, and hoped for lenient treatment. Administrator Fleming leaned forward. Sentinel Chen, you are not represented by counsel, nor do you have legal training. This panel is fully capable of determining the appropriate legal framework for your case. With respect, sir, I believe there are recent changes to the administrative code that directly apply to my situation. I have prepared a brief analysis for the panel's consideration. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew several handwritten pages. The officials stared in amazement as he approached the bench and handed each of them a copy of his research. Colonel Morrison was the first to speak. Sentinel Chen, where did you obtain this information? From the Palace Library, ma'am. All of these sources are publicly available administrative records and legal statutes. Magistrate Webb scanned the first page, his eyebrows rising as he read. Marcus had organized his argument in proper legal format, complete with citations, precedent, references, and a clear statement of applicable law. The writing was precise, professional, and remarkably sophisticated for someone without formal legal training. "You compiled this research yourself?" the magistrate asked. "Yes, sir. I have been studying administrative law as a personal interest for several years." The panel spent several minutes reviewing Marcus's brief. The room fell silent except for the rustling of papers and the occasional murmur of surprise from the officials. Marcus stood at attention, waiting for their response, his heart hammering against his ribs. Finally, Magistrate Webb looked up. "Sentinel Chen, you cite Section 847B of the Revised Palace Administrative Code. Can you explain in your own words how you believe this section applies to your case?" Marcus took a deep breath. This was his moment. "Sir, Section 847B establishes a framework for evaluating minor infractions committed by personnel with exemplary service records. The regulation specifically states that when an individual immediately acknowledges responsibility for their actions and demonstrates no intent to deceive or obstruct justice, disciplinary measures should prioritize correction over punishment." He paused, gathering confidence as he saw the officials paying careful attention to his words. Furthermore, the regulation requires that the severity of punishment be proportional to the actual harm caused by the infraction. In my case, the momentary weight shift posed no threat to security, caused no disruption to the ceremony's substance, and was immediately acknowledged without attempting deception. Colonel Morrison interrupted. "But you did break formation during an official inspection. That is a clear violation of ceremonial protocol." "Yes, ma'am, and I accept responsibility for that violation. However, under the current administrative code, the circumstances of the violation must be considered alongside the violation itself. My service record shows 5 years of exemplary conduct, including commendations for dedication and reliability. The infraction was minor, involuntary due to a medical condition, and handled with complete honesty." Administrator Fleming was now studying Marcus's brief more carefully. "You also cite precedent cases here. Where did you find these references?" "In the legal archives section of the library, sir. I researched similar cases from the past 2 years to understand how the new regulation has been applied in comparable situations." Magistrate Webb set down the papers and stared directly at Marcus. "Sentinel Chen, this is remarkable work. Your analysis is thorough, your legal reasoning is sound, and your presentation is more professional than many trained attorneys I encounter in my courtroom." Marcus felt a flicker of hope, but he knew better than to assume victory. "Thank you, sir. I simply wanted to ensure that all relevant factors were considered in determining my punishment." "Where did you learn to research and write like this?" "My father worked as a court clerk for 30 years, sir. I grew up listening to legal discussions and reading case files. When I joined the Palace Guard, I continued studying law in my spare time because I found it fascinating." The 3 officials conferred in whispered tones for several minutes. Marcus caught fragments of their conversation. Unprecedented, exceptional circumstances, remarkable initiative. He tried not to get his hopes up, but he could sense that something unusual was happening. Finally, Magistrate Webb addressed him again. "Sentinel Chen, based on your presentation and the legal authorities you have cited, this panel finds that while you did technically violate ceremonial protocol, the circumstances warrant consideration under Section 847B of the Administrative Code." Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. "However," the magistrate continued, "we are faced with an unusual situation. Your legal research and analytical skills are extraordinary. It would be a waste of talent to simply return you to regular sentinel duty without addressing this remarkable aptitude you have demonstrated." Colonel Morrison nodded. "In my 20 years of military service, I have never seen an enlisted guard present such sophisticated legal analysis. Your brief is better written than most documents produced by our legal department." Administrator Fleming added, "The palace has an ongoing need for personnel who understand both security operations and legal procedures. There are positions in our administrative division that would benefit from someone with your unique combination of experience and knowledge. Marcus wasn't sure what they were suggesting, but he sensed that his afternoon was taking an unexpected turn. Magistrate Webb stood up. Sentinel Chen, this panel hereby sentences you to a transfer to the Legal Affairs Division as an administrative specialist, effective immediately. Your new position will involve reviewing security procedures for legal compliance and assisting with policy development. Marcus stared at them in shock. Sir, I don't understand. Am I being punished or promoted? Both. The magistrate smiled slightly. You broke formation during an inspection, which requires disciplinary action. However, your response to that situation has revealed talents that the palace needs to utilize. Your new position comes with a substantial salary increase and opportunities for advancement that would never be available in the Guard. Colonel Morrison stood as well. Your first assignment will be to review our entire ceremonial protocol manual and identify areas where current procedures conflict with updated administrative regulations. Based on your research today, I suspect you'll find quite a few inconsistencies that need to be addressed. As Marcus walked out of the disciplinary chamber an hour later, his head was spinning. He had entered expecting to lose his job and possibly face public humiliation. Instead, he was leaving with a promotion to a position he had never dreamed of achieving. But the real surprise was yet to come. As he gathered his belongings from the Sentinel quarters, David Park approached him with an expression of amazement. Marcus, what happened in there? The rumors are flying around the palace. Some people are saying you argued with the magistrate. Others claim you quoted legal cases from memory. Marcus smiled as he packed his law books. I just did what Dad always taught me. Be honest, be prepared, and never be afraid to stand up for what's right even when you're scared. What he didn't know was that Magistrate Webb had already sent a message to the Chief Justice of the Palace court system, describing the extraordinary legal mind they had discovered in their security division. Marcus's first day in the Legal Affairs Division felt like entering a different world. Gone were the rigid uniforms and ceremonial duties of the Palace Guard. Instead, he found himself in a bustling office environment where attorneys, clerks, and administrators worked together to manage the complex legal framework that governed palace operations. His new supervisor, Director Sarah Martinez, was a sharp-minded lawyer in her 40s who had built the Legal Affairs Division from a small compliance office into a respected department that advised senior palace officials on everything from employment disputes to international protocol. So you're the Sentinel who impressed Magistrate Webb, she said, reviewing his file on his first morning. I've read your disciplinary hearing brief. Quite impressive for someone without formal legal training. Marcus felt nervous energy coursing through him. Thank you, ma'am. I'm eager to learn and contribute however I can. Your first project is exactly what Colonel Morrison mentioned, reviewing our ceremonial protocol manual for legal compliance issues. It's a massive document that hasn't been thoroughly updated in over a decade. I suspect you'll find numerous inconsistencies between our written procedures and current administrative law. She handed him a thick binder containing hundreds of pages of protocols, regulations, and procedures. Take your time, be thorough, and don't hesitate to ask questions. Your unique perspective as someone who has actually performed these duties will be invaluable. Marcus spent the first week immersing himself in the project. As he read through the manual, his excitement grew. He discovered inconsistencies everywhere, outdated regulations that contradicted current law, procedures that violated recently, enacted employee rights protections and ceremonial requirements that had no legal basis in current statutes. His background as a palace sentinel proved invaluable. He understood which procedures were actually followed in practice versus what was written on paper. Many protocols had evolved informally over the years, but the official manual had never been updated to reflect these changes. By the end of his second week, Marcus had compiled a comprehensive report identifying over 40 significant legal issues within the ceremonial protocol manual. His analysis was detailed, well-researched, and presented in professional legal format that impressed everyone who read it. Director Martinez called him into her office after reviewing his report. Marcus, this is exceptional work. You've identified problems that our legal team has missed for years. Some of these inconsistencies could have exposed the palace to serious liability if challenged in court. Marcus felt a surge of pride. Thank you. I found the work fascinating. There's so much complexity in balancing traditional ceremonial practices with modern legal requirements. That's exactly the kind of analytical thinking we need more of in this department. I'm assigning you to work directly with our senior attorneys on several upcoming projects. Over the next month, Marcus threw himself into his new role with enthusiasm that surprised even him. He discovered that he had a natural talent for legal research and analysis that went far beyond his self-taught knowledge. His colleagues, initially skeptical of the former guard, began seeking his input on complex cases because of his unique insights and thorough research methods. The turning point came when Administrator Fleming presented Marcus with a particularly challenging assignment. A group of palace employees had filed a formal complaint alleging that certain workplace policies violated their rights under new employment protection laws. The case had the potential to become a costly lawsuit if not handled properly. This is sensitive, Marcus, Fleming explained. These employees have legitimate concerns, but changing our policies could set precedents that affect hundreds of other workers. We need someone to research the legal landscape thoroughly and recommend a solution that protects both employee rights and palace interests. Marcus spent 2 weeks diving deep into employment law, studying recent court decisions and interviewing the affected employees to understand their concerns. His investigation revealed that the employees were absolutely right. Several palace key policies did violate current employment law. More importantly, he discovered that the palace was vulnerable to similar complaints from hundreds of other workers who simply hadn't realized their rights were being violated. His solution was elegant and comprehensive. Instead of simply fixing the immediate problem, Marcus proposed a complete overhaul of palace employment policies that would bring the institution into full compliance with current law while actually improving working conditions for all employees. His proposal included specific implementation timelines, cost analyses, and risk assessments. When he presented his findings to a meeting of senior palace officials, the room fell silent. Chief Administrator Williams, who had initially been skeptical of the former guard's qualifications, stared at the presentation in amazement. Mr. Chen, this is remarkable work. You've not only solved the immediate problem, but identified systemic issues we didn't even know existed. Implementing your recommendations will prevent dozens of potential lawsuits and significantly improve employee satisfaction. Magistrate Webb, who had been invited to attend the meeting, smiled as he watched Marcus field questions from senior officials. The young man who had stood before him in the disciplinary chamber just months ago was now confidently discussing complex legal strategies with some of the most powerful people in the palace administration. After the meeting, Director Martinez pulled Marcus aside. I've been practicing law for 20 years and your analysis was more thorough than work I've seen from attorneys with decades of experience. Have you ever considered pursuing formal legal education? Marcus looked surprised. I've thought about it, but law school is expensive and I have family obligations. My sister is still in university and my mother depends on my income. What if I told you there might be a way to pursue legal training while continuing to work here? The palace has a professional development program that provides educational support for exceptional employees. That evening, Marcus called his family to share the news about his success at work. His sister was thrilled to hear about his promotion and the recognition he was receiving. His mother, as always, was proud but cautious. I'm happy for you, son, but don't let success go to your head. Remember where you came from and stay humble. I will, Mom. Actually, Director Martinez thinks I might be able to go to law school while continuing to work. Can you believe it? I can believe anything about you, Marcus. Your father always said you had the mind of a lawyer. He would be so proud to see what you've accomplished. As Marcus hung up the phone, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he had been a palace guard whose biggest concern was standing still during inspections. Now he was analyzing complex legal issues and advising senior officials on policy matters that affected thousands of people. But the biggest surprise was still ahead of him. The next morning, Director Martinez called him into her office with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Marcus, I have incredible news. I submitted your employment policy analysis to the National Legal Excellence Awards, and you've been selected as a finalist in the category of Outstanding Legal Research by a non-attorney." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "I'm sorry. What?" "It's a prestigious national competition that recognizes exceptional legal work by individuals who haven't completed formal legal education. The award ceremony is next month, and you'll be presenting your research to a panel of judges that includes Supreme Court justices and leading legal scholars." As the implications sank in, Marcus realized that his simple mistake during a palace inspection had set in motion a chain of events that was transforming his entire life. What he didn't know was that his presentation at the awards ceremony would catch the attention of someone who would change his future in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The National Legal Excellence Awards ceremony was held in the grand ballroom of the capital's most prestigious hotel. Marcus had never been in such an elegant setting. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and distinguished attorneys in expensive suits mingled with judges, government officials, and legal scholars from across the country. As he adjusted his tie for the 10th time, Marcus felt completely out of place. The other finalists were accomplished professionals with impressive credentials, senior paralegals with decades of experience, legal aid directors who had argued cases before appellate courts, and government analysts with advanced degrees from top universities. Director Martinez, who had accompanied him to the ceremony, noticed his nervousness. "Marcus, you belong here. Your research was selected from over 500 submissions nationwide. The judges recognized exceptional work, regardless of your formal credentials." The awards ceremony began with presentations by each finalist. Marcus was scheduled to present last, which gave him time to observe the other competitors and learn from their presentation styles. Each speaker was polished, confident, and clearly experienced in addressing professional audiences. When his turn came, Marcus walked to the podium with his heart pounding. He looked out at an audience of several hundred legal professionals, including Chief Justice Patricia Reynolds, who would be presenting the awards. For a moment his mind went blank, and he considered simply reading from his prepared notes. Then he remembered his father's advice about speaking truthfully and from the heart. Instead of beginning with the formal introduction he had planned, Marcus spoke directly to the audience. "6 months ago, I was a palace guard whose biggest legal concern was understanding the regulations that governed when I could take bathroom breaks during ceremonial duties. I never imagined I would be standing here presenting legal research to an audience of distinguished attorneys and judges." A ripple of surprised laughter went through the room. This was not the typical awards ceremony presentation. What I want to share with you today is not just the results of my research, but the story of how a simple mistake led me to discover problems that were affecting thousands of workers who had no voice in the system. Marcus went on to describe his journey, from palace sentinel to legal researcher, but he focused primarily on the substance of his work. He explained how outdated employment policies were systematically violating worker rights, not through malicious intent, but through institutional blindness to changing legal landscapes. His presentation included specific examples of policy conflicts, detailed analysis of legal precedents, and practical solutions that had already been implemented successfully at the palace. But what made his presentation unique was his perspective as someone who had been directly affected by the policies he was analyzing. "The difference between theory and practice," he concluded, "is that theory assumes perfect information and rational actors. Practice reveals that most workplace violations occur because good people are operating under bad systems. My research showed that fixing the systems protects everyone. Employees get their rights respected, and employers avoid costly legal problems they never intended to create." When he finished, the room erupted in applause that lasted nearly a minute. As Marcus returned to his seat, he noticed several judges taking notes and whispering among themselves. Chief Justice Reynolds announced the winners an hour later. Marcus held his breath as she opened the envelope for the Outstanding Legal Research category. The winner of this year's award for Outstanding Legal Research by a non-attorney is Marcus Chen for his comprehensive analysis of employment policy. compliance in government institutions. Mr. Chen's work demonstrates that exceptional legal thinking can emerge from unexpected places, and that lived experience combined with rigorous research can produce insights that purely academic analysis might miss. As Marcus walked to the stage to accept his award, he felt surreal. The crystal trophy in his hands represented recognition from the highest levels of the legal profession for work that had grown out of a muscle cramp during a palace inspection. After the ceremony, Marcus was surrounded by attorneys, judges, and legal scholars who wanted to discuss his research and learn more about his background. The conversations were exhilarating. For the first time in his life, he was engaged in sophisticated legal discussions as an equal rather than an observer. The most significant conversation came from an unexpected source. Dean Elizabeth Carter, the head of the country's most prestigious law school, approached him as the reception was winding down. "Mr. Chen, I attended your presentation this evening, and I was deeply impressed. Your analytical skills and practical insights are exactly what legal education needs more of." Marcus felt starstruck. Dean Carter was a legendary figure in legal education, known for her innovative approaches to training lawyers and her commitment to increasing diversity in the legal profession. "Thank you, Dean Carter. Your words mean more to me than I can express. I have a proposition for you. Our law school has a special program for exceptional students who bring unique backgrounds and perspectives to legal education. It's the accelerated track that allows working professionals to complete their legal studies while maintaining their current positions." Marcus's heart began racing. "That sounds incredible, but I'm not sure I could qualify for admission to your school. My undergraduate background is in criminal justice from a community college, and I don't have the typical pre-law credentials. Mr. Chen, after tonight, I think we can safely say you don't need typical credentials. Your award-winning research demonstrates legal reasoning skills that many of our students struggle to develop after years of formal training. I'm offering you a full scholarship to our Executive Legal Studies program." The room seemed to spin around Marcus. A full scholarship to the nation's top law school was beyond anything he had ever dreamed possible. "There is one condition," Dean Carter continued. "As part of your studies, you would be required to participate in our Legal Innovation Lab, where students work on real-world problems that affect underserved communities. Your experience with employment policy analysis would be invaluable in developing solutions for workers who face similar systemic problems." Marcus thought about his fellow palace guards, many of whom had never realized they had legal rights that were being violated. He considered his sister's university classmates, who often worked in jobs where they were taken advantage of because they didn't understand employment law. He pictured his mother, who had spent years in low-wage positions where basic protections were routinely ignored. "Dean Carter, I would be honored to accept your offer." As he shook hands with one of the most powerful figures in legal education, Marcus reflected on the impossible chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A simple muscle cramp during a palace inspection had somehow led to a full scholarship at the country's most prestigious law school, but the evening held one more surprise. As Marcus was leaving the hotel, Magistrate Webb approached him in the lobby. "Congratulations, Marcus. I knew there was something special about you from the moment you admitted to breaking formation instead of trying to lie your way out of trouble." "Thank you, sir. None of this would have happened without your decision to consider the legal context of my situation instead of just imposing standard punishment." Magistrate Webb smiled. "Actually, I have a confession to make. I knew about that administrative regulation you cited in your disciplinary hearing. I had helped draft it 6 months earlier as part of a judicial reform committee." Marcus stared at him in surprise. "You knew?" "I knew the regulation existed, but I had never seen it applied so brilliantly by someone who had researched it independently. Your legal brief was better than the work product I see from experienced attorneys in my courtroom every day." That's when I realized we had discovered something extraordinary. As Marcus walked back to his hotel room that night, carrying his award and acceptance letter to law school, he understood that his life had changed forever. The scared palace guard who had stood in the disciplinary chamber 8 months earlier no longer existed. In his place was someone who had discovered not just a career, but a calling that combined his natural analytical abilities with his deep commitment to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of balancing law school with his responsibilities at the palace. But tonight, he simply wanted to call his family and share the incredible news that would transform all of their lives. 2 years into law school, Marcus had established himself as one of the most dedicated students in the executive program. Balancing his coursework with his responsibilities at the Palace Legal Affairs Division required 18-hour days and careful time management, but he thrived under the pressure. His work in the Legal Innovation Lab had already produced 3 published papers on employment law reform, and his practical experience at the palace provided real-world context that impressed both professors and fellow students. Marcus had become known for his ability to identify systemic legal problems and develop practical solutions that could be implemented in real institutions. The breakthrough case came during his 2nd year, when Director Martinez assigned him to investigate a complex situation that had been escalating for months. A group of maintenance workers at a government facility had filed complaints alleging systematic wage theft and unsafe working conditions. The case had potential to become a major scandal if not handled properly. "This is sensitive, Marcus," Director Martinez explained during their morning briefing. "The facility involved is the Central Archives building, which houses classified government records. The workers claim they're being forced to work overtime without compensation, and that management is ignoring serious safety hazards." Marcus reviewed the case file with growing concern. The maintenance workers had been complaining for over a year about problems ranging from unpaid overtime to exposure to hazardous chemicals without proper protective equipment. Their supervisors had dismissed most complaints as routine worker dissatisfaction. "What makes this particularly complicated," Director Martinez continued, "is that the facility management insists they're following all applicable regulations. They've provided documentation showing compliance with federal labor standards and safety protocols." Marcus spent the next week interviewing the affected workers and reviewing documentation from both sides. What he discovered was a complex web of regulatory conflicts and bureaucratic blind spots that had created a system where everyone believed they were following the rules, but workers were still being harmed. The problem, Marcus realized, was that the facility was governed by multiple overlapping regulatory frameworks. As a government building, it fell under federal employment standards. As an archives facility, it was subject to specialized preservation regulations. As a secure facility housing classified materials, it had unique security requirements that affected working conditions. The intersection of these different regulatory systems had created gaps where worker protections were assumed to be covered by other agencies, but actually weren't covered at all. Management genuinely believed they were in compliance because they were meeting the requirements of each individual regulatory framework, but no one had examined how those frameworks interacted. Marcus's analysis revealed that the workers' complaints were entirely valid. They were experiencing wage theft and unsafe conditions. But the facility management wasn't deliberately violating the law. They were caught in a regulatory maze where compliance with one set of rules sometimes required violation of another set. His solution was characteristically thorough and innovative. Instead of simply identifying the problems, Marcus drafted a comprehensive regulatory harmonization proposal that would eliminate conflicts between the different legal frameworks governing the facility. His proposal included specific implementation steps, cost analyses, and timelines for bringing the facility into full compliance with all applicable laws. When he presented his findings to a joint committee of government officials, labor representatives, and facility management, the room was stunned by the complexity of the legal analysis and the practicality of the proposed solutions. Department Director Williams, who had been skeptical of the young law student's ability to handle such a sensitive case, was the first to speak. "Mr. Chen, this is extraordinary work. You've identified systemic problems that multiple agencies with full-time compliance staff have missed completely." The labor representative, Attorney Lisa Thompson, nodded in agreement. "More importantly, your solutions address the workers' concerns while providing management with a clear path to compliance. This is exactly the kind of collaborative approach that prevents these conflicts from escalating into costly litigation." The facility management representative looked relieved. "We genuinely wanted to comply with all regulations, but we were getting conflicting guidance from different agencies. Mr. Chen's proposal gives us a unified framework that we can actually implement. Marcus's regulatory harmonization proposal was adopted in full and became a model for addressing similar conflicts at other government facilities. Within 6 months, his approach had been implemented at 12 different sites, preventing potential lawsuits and improving working conditions for hundreds of employees. The success of the archives case caught the attention of senior government officials beyond the palace administration. Marcus received a call from Deputy Attorney General Robert Harrison, requesting a meeting to discuss his regulatory analysis work. Mr. Chen, your approach to resolving the archives facility dispute has impressed people at the highest levels of government, Deputy Attorney General Harrison explained during their meeting. We're facing similar regulatory conflicts across dozens of federal agencies, and traditional legal approaches aren't working. Marcus felt honored but nervous. Thank you, sir. I'm still a law student, though I'm not sure I have the experience to handle federal-level regulatory issues. Experience comes in many forms. Your background gives you perspectives that career government lawyers often lack. You understand what it's like to work within these systems, not just regulate them from above. The Deputy Attorney General explained that the Department of Justice was launching a new regulatory harmonization initiative designed to identify and resolve conflicts between different federal agencies' rules and regulations. They wanted Marcus to lead a pilot project examining employment law conflicts across government facilities. This would be a significant commitment, Harrison warned. You'd be working directly with cabinet-level officials and testifying before congressional committees. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Marcus thought about his journey from palace guard to law student. Each step had required him to take on responsibilities he hadn't felt ready for, but each challenge had revealed capabilities he didn't know he possessed. Yes, sir. I'm ready to take on this challenge. The pilot project consumed Marcus's final year of law school. Working with a team of attorneys from multiple government agencies, he conducted comprehensive analysis of regulatory conflicts affecting federal employees across the country. His work revealed hundreds of situations where overlapping jurisdictions created gaps in worker protections or impossible compliance requirements for management. His final report, submitted to Congress 6 months before his law school graduation, identified systematic problems affecting over 50,000 federal workers and proposed detailed solutions that could be implemented without major legislative changes. The report's combination of rigorous legal analysis and practical implementation strategies impressed lawmakers from both political parties. During his testimony before the House Committee on Government Oversight, Marcus faced skeptical questioning from representatives who doubted that a former security guard could understand the complexities of federal regulatory policy. Representative Johnson, known for his aggressive questioning style, challenged Marcus directly. Mr. Chen, you're asking us to restructure regulatory frameworks that have been in place for decades, based on analysis by someone who was standing guard at a palace just 3 years ago. Why should Congress trust your recommendations over the judgment of career civil servants with decades of experience? Marcus had prepared for this question. Representative Johnson, you're absolutely right that I lack the decades of experience that many career civil servants possess. But that inexperience has also allowed me to see problems that institutional blindness has hidden from more experienced observers. He went on to explain specific examples from his research where long-standing practices had continued because that's how we've always done it, even though those practices violated current law or harmed workers. My recommendations aren't based on my personal opinions, Marcus continued. They're based on systematic analysis of legal conflicts that affect real people doing real work. The 50,000 federal employees who are being harmed by regulatory gaps don't care about my background. They care about whether someone can fix the problems that are affecting their daily lives. Representative Johnson pressed further. But implementing your recommendations would require significant changes to established procedures. How do we know these changes won't create new problems? That's exactly why I've proposed a phased implementation approach with regular evaluation points. We start with pilot programs at selected facilities, measure the results, and adjust the approach based on actual outcomes. If the changes don't improve conditions for workers while maintaining operational efficiency, we modify or abandon them. By the end of his testimony, even the skeptical representatives were asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and resource requirements. Marcus's practice. Marcus stood in the same palace courtyard where his legal journey had begun 3 years earlier, weighing the most important decision of his career. The Supreme Court clerkship represented everything he had never dared to dream: prestige, influence, and access to the highest levels of legal power in the country. But as he watched the current palace guards maintaining their formations during the evening ceremony, he remembered why he had become passionate about law in the first place. It wasn't the intellectual challenge or the professional recognition, though he enjoyed both. It was the ability to help people who were trapped in systems they didn't understand, facing problems they couldn't solve on their own. The next morning, Marcus called Chief Justice Reynolds with his decision. "Chief Justice Reynolds, I'm deeply honored by your offer, and I hope you'll understand that declining it is one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made." There was a long pause before the Chief Justice responded. "Marcus, I'm surprised, but I respect your decision. May I ask what's leading you to turn down this opportunity?" "I've realized that my greatest strength as a lawyer comes from my understanding of how legal systems affect ordinary people. A Supreme Court clerkship would be an incredible honor, but it would distance me from the practical work that makes me most effective. What do you plan to do instead?" Marcus had spent weeks developing his alternative plan. "I want to establish a legal clinic that specializes in helping workers navigate complex regulatory systems. There are thousands of people facing the same kinds of problems I helped solve at the archives facility, but they don't have access to the legal expertise needed to address systemic issues." Chief Justice Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "That's admirable work, Marcus, but it won't provide the same career opportunities as a Supreme Court clerkship. Are you certain this is the path you want to pursue?" "I'm certain. I've learned that the most rewarding legal work for me is helping people who have no other options. That's where I can make the biggest difference." "Well, if you change your mind, my offer remains open. And Marcus, I think you're making a decision your father would be proud of." Within 6 months of graduating from law school, Marcus had established the Worker Rights Legal Clinic in a small office just blocks from the palace. His clinic specialized in cases involving regulatory conflicts and systemic workplace violations that were too complex for traditional legal aid services, but too small for major law firms. His first major case came from an unexpected source. David Park, his former roommate from his palace guard days, contacted him about problems at a private security company where many former government employees worked. "Marcus, you won't believe what's happening at Secure Guard Services. They're using our government security training as an excuse to pay us below minimum wage, claiming that our specialized skills qualify us as independent contractors instead of employees." Marcus investigated and discovered that Secure Guard was systematically misclassifying employees to avoid paying benefits and overtime compensation. Worse, they were targeting former government workers who were unfamiliar with private sector employment law and afraid to challenge a company that promised to provide positive references for future government positions. The case was complex because it involved the intersection of government employment regulations, private sector labor law, and federal contracting requirements. Most attorneys would have focused on one aspect of the legal violations, but Marcus's comprehensive approach addressed all 3 areas simultaneously. His strategy was to document the systematic nature of the violations and demonstrate that Secure Guard's practices were not isolated mistakes but a deliberate business model designed to exploit worker ignorance of their legal rights. He gathered evidence from over 200 affected workers and built a case that showed the company had saved millions of dollars through illegal practices. The litigation took 18 months, during which Marcus worked 18-hour days while building his clinic's reputation. When Secure Guard finally agreed to settle, the resolution included not only financial compensation for affected workers, but also fundamental changes to the company's employment practices. More importantly for Marcus, the case established his clinic as a resource for workers facing systemic exploitation. Word spread through the community of former government employees that there was finally a lawyer who understood their unique situations and was willing to take on complex cases that other attorneys avoided. The clinic's success attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Dean Elizabeth Carter, who had provided Marcus's law school scholarship, visited the clinic during its second year of operation. "Marcus, what you've built here is remarkable. Your clinic is handling cases that law schools use as examples of the most complex regulatory challenges in employment law." Marcus showed her around the modest offices where he and two associates worked on dozens of active cases. "It's not glamorous work, but it's exactly what I wanted to do with my legal career. Have you considered teaching? Law schools need professors who can bridge the gap between academic theory and practical application. Your experience would be invaluable for students who want to do this kind of work." The idea intrigued Marcus, but he was concerned about leaving his clients. "I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm not sure I want to step away from direct legal practice." "What if you didn't have to step away?" "We're developing a new clinical education program where practicing attorneys teach part-time while maintaining their own practices. Students work on real cases under supervision, learning practical skills while providing legal services to underserved communities." Dean Carter's proposal led to Marcus splitting his time between his clinic and teaching at the law school. His courses on regulatory compliance and worker rights and systematic legal analysis became among the most popular offerings for students interested in public interest law. 5 years after establishing his clinic, Marcus received a call that brought his career full circle. Magistrate Webb, now presiding over a special commission investigating government workplace practices, invited him to serve as the commission's chief legal analyst. "Marcus, we're facing systemic problems across multiple government agencies, and we need someone who understands both the legal frameworks and the practical realities of government employment. Your regulatory harmonization work showed that you're uniquely qualified for this role." The commission appointment would require Marcus to temporarily step back from his clinic, but it offered an opportunity to address workplace problems on a scale that could affect hundreds of thousands of government employees. As Marcus considered the offer, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from palace guard to recognized expert in employment law and regulatory policy. Each transition in his career had built on previous experiences while opening new opportunities to help people navigate complex legal systems. The scared young Sentinel who had broken formation during an inspection could never have imagined the career that mistake would ultimately create. But Marcus understood now that his greatest strength as a lawyer wasn't his analytical skills or legal knowledge, impressive as those had become. It was his never-forgotten understanding of what it felt like to be powerless within a system that seemed designed to punish honest mistakes while protecting those who knew how to work the system. When he accepted the commission appointment, the following week, Marcus knew he was taking on the most challenging work of his career. He would be investigating the same kinds of systemic problems that had once affected him personally, but now he had the legal expertise and institutional authority to create solutions that could protect future workers from experiencing the fear and helplessness he had felt in that palace courtyard so many years ago. As he packed his law books for the move to his new office, Marcus found the original copy of his disciplinary hearing brief, the legal analysis that had started everything. He smiled as he read his younger self's careful citations and nervous arguments, remembering how terrified he had been to challenge the system. Now he was about to help reform that same system from the inside, armed with knowledge, experience, and the unshakable conviction that everyone deserved protection under the law, regardless of their position or background. The palace guard who had been punished for a moment of human weakness had become the lawyer who would spend his career ensuring that such punishment was both fair and just.